Oprah Winfrey. A name the world knows, but a soul few have ever truly understood. Before the billion-dollar empire, before the golden stages and applause, there was a barefoot girl in Mississippi, hungry, wounded, and unseen. She didn't survive on food. She survived on words. From silence to power, from pain to purpose, this is the untold journey of a woman who turned suffering into light and taught the world that grace is the greatest form of strength. In the blistering heat of Mississippi's red clay fields, a little girl sat under a collapsing tin roof, reading aloud from a Bible that was older than her shoes because she didn't have any. Her name was Oprah Winfrey, and in a world where hunger gnawed louder than prayer, words became her only meal. When her stomach was empty, she fed on stories. When her heart was broken, she memorized verses until the pain turned quiet. In a shack where there was no bed, no food, no future, a child discovered that language could fill the void where love and comfort should have been. She wasn't reading for school. There was no school that cared about a poor black girl born to a teenage housemaid. She was reading to survive, to remember that the world was bigger than the dirt she slept on, bigger than the silence that grew after every argument between adults who had already stopped dreaming. At night, the sounds of crickets mixed with her whispering voice. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It wasn't faith, not yet. It was survival. Every word she repeated was a breath she refused to lose. In the dim light of a single candle, she spoke life into herself before anyone else would. Neighbors said she was strange, too quiet, too thoughtful, always talking to herself. They didn't know she was talking to the only friend she had, the words. While other children played with dolls or stones, Oprah played with sentences. She rearranged them like pieces of hope, trying to build a world where no one would laugh at her poverty, her accent, or her dreams. There were days when she was punished for speaking too much, for asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. But she kept talking because silence felt like death. Every story she read became a doorway. Every page she turned became a step away from the shack. From the hunger, from the unbearable feeling of being invisible. Years later, she would stand on television stages and move millions to tears with the same voice that once trembled in the dark. But back then, it was just a little girl barefoot, hungry, and unseen, reading to stay alive. Because sometimes the only way to survive poverty isn't with food, but with faith, and words became her faith long before she learned what the word faith even meant. Before the world saw her as a billionaire icon, she was just a scared little girl hiding behind a broken door. Poverty could starve your body, but cruelty starved your soul. And for Oprah, both came early. The same hands that should have held her safe became the hands that took her innocence. In that tiny Mississippi house, trust shattered before she ever learned what the word meant. At 9 years old, she was taught the kind of silence that has no sound, the kind you carry for a lifetime. She was abused by relatives, by people who smiled at her mother in church, by men who treated her body as if it were nothing more than a secret. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Because in her world, little girls were told to stay quiet, to behave, to survive. By 14, she was pregnant, a child carrying another child, her childhood buried beneath the weight of shame and whispers. The world didn't comfort her. It condemned her. Even the church pews she once clung to felt colder, harder. She stopped looking at the sky because even heaven seemed to look away. When the baby was born, it lived only a few days. The tiny heartbeat that once fluttered inside her stopped, and so did a part of Oprah. She never spoke about that pain for years. How could she? Who would understand the emptiness of losing something you never got to love? That tragedy didn't just end a chapter of her life, it burned it. But from that ash came something fierce. In the silence that followed her child's death, she made a vow. No one will ever define me again. There, standing on the edge of despair, a 14-year-old girl began her rebirth. She realized no savior was coming, not her mother, not the church, not God in the way she had imagined. If she was going to be saved, she would have to do it herself. That lesson, brutal, unfair, and far too early, became the spine of her life. Every success, every word she spoke decades later on national television carried the echo of that little girl who refused to die in silence. She would turn her pain into purpose, her shame into strength, and her brokenness into something sacred. Years later, when she stood before audiences and said, "You are not your past," she wasn't preaching. She was remembering a child who never got to be a child. A young girl who learned the hardest truth of all that pain, if faced and not feared, can become the fire that lights your way. When the storms of her early life became too violent to bear, her mother made a decision, one that would change everything. Oprah was sent north to live with her father in Nashville. She thought she was being abandoned again. What she didn't know was that this stern man, who rarely smiled and never said "I love you," would become the foundation beneath her future. Vernon Winfrey was not gentle. He believed in rules, in books, in hard work, in order. He didn't hug her. He didn't ask how she felt. But he demanded she read a book each week and present a report on it every Sunday. For a girl who had already found refuge in words, this was not punishment, it was purpose. Under his strict roof, the chaos stopped. There was no screaming, no violence, no men sneaking into rooms, only structure. And for the first time in her young life, Oprah felt safe, not loved perhaps, but safe enough to dream. He woke her before dawn, made her read the newspaper aloud, and corrected her pronunciation word by word. He taught her that every sentence carried weight, that clarity was power. He told her that education was the one thing no one could ever steal. She didn't understand it then, but Vernon was building an armor around her, not of steel, but of knowledge. While others might have drowned her in pity, he gave her discipline. And that discipline would later become the spine of the woman who ran empires. At night, she sat by the window watching the dim streetlight outside, wondering why her father never said kind words, why he never called her beautiful. What she didn't see was that he was paying her tuition when he could barely afford food, that he was staying up late just to make sure she came home safe. His love was silent, but it was there in the way he corrected her grammar, in the way he made her believe she could be more. Years later, she would say, "My father saved my life," not because he showered her with affection, but because he showed her a new kind of faith. The belief that discipline could be love, that structure could be safety, that strength could be tenderness in disguise. For the first time, the little girl who ate words to survive began to use them to build something. She joined debate clubs, entered speaking contests, and realized her voice, once her only defense, could now become her destiny. And when she looked back years later at the man who never said "I love you," she finally understood he didn't have to say it. He lived it. The day Oprah Winfrey first walked into a radio station, she wasn't wearing her own shoes. She had borrowed them, too big, slightly torn, but polished as best she could. The soles flapped when she walked, but her voice didn't. It was steady, warm, unforgettable. In that tiny booth filled with static and cigarette smoke, a 17-year-old girl from Mississippi finally found something that felt like home: a microphone. She didn't have the look the world wanted. Her hair wasn't styled, her clothes weren't new, and her accent carried the thick melody of the South. But when she spoke, people stopped to listen. There was something different in her tone, not performance but truth. Every word came from a place that had known hunger, heartbreak, and survival. That's why it mattered. Her first job at a local radio station paid almost nothing but to Oprah. It was more than a job. It was oxygen. Every shift behind that microphone was a chance to prove she existed, that the barefoot girl who once read to candlelight now had something to say to the world. When she announced the news or read community bulletins, she did it with the weight of someone who knew that words could change everything. Yet the dream didn't come easy. She was fired once for being too emotional on air. They told her she cried too much, felt too much, talked too much. But Oprah refused to flatten herself to fit the world's idea of a reporter. She said later, "I don't do cold." And she never did. She turned vulnerability into her signature, a weapon no one saw coming. When television came calling, she was terrified. Cameras were colder than microphones. They captured not just your voice, but your pain, your history, your skin. And in the 1970s, a young black woman in front of the camera was still a rarity, often a risk. But she went anyway, with borrowed shoes, trembling hands, and a fire that had burned for too long to be extinguished. Her first on-screen job wasn't glamorous. She covered local stories, community tragedies, and human interest pieces. But with every interview, she asked questions no one else dared to ask. She didn't chase headlines, she chased humanity. People began to recognize her, not just for her voice, but for her empathy, for the way she leaned forward when someone cried, for the way she made silence feel safe. What she didn't realize then was that she wasn't just reporting stories. She was preparing to create the biggest stage in television history, one where the voiceless could finally be heard. That borrowed pair of shoes became a symbol of everything she would: humble beginnings, borrowed chances, and the courage to step into rooms not meant for her. Years later, when her name would glow on studio walls, she never forgot that feeling, the sound of worn soles against the studio floor, the echo of fear turning into destiny. Because the truth is, she didn't just walk into broadcasting. She walked out of poverty, one borrowed step at a time. When the Oprah Winfrey Show first aired, no one, not even Oprah, understood what it would become. It wasn't just another talk show. It was a revolution in empathy, a sanctuary disguised as daytime television, a church without pews where millions came to be seen, heard, and forgiven. From the moment she walked on stage, the energy changed. Audiences didn't just watch her, they felt her. When a guest cried, she didn't sit back, she leaned in. When someone revealed a secret, she didn't sensationalize, she understood. She blurred the line between host and human, and in doing so, turned vulnerability into power. America had never seen anything like it. Here was a black woman in the 1980s commanding daytime TV, a space once dominated by white anchors and scripted smiles, and she did it by breaking every rule. Producers told her to stay detached. She chose connection. Executives wanted conflict. She created community. In a medium built for noise, she made silence sacred. Soon, her stage became a mirror for the nation. Victims of abuse, survivors of addiction families, torn apart by secrets, they came to her not for fame, but for healing. The cameras rolled, but what happened there felt private, spiritual. People didn't come for advice. They came to be understood. And Oprah gave everything she had. She cried on air. She shared her own trauma. She opened her own wounds so others would know they weren't alone. Week after week, year after year, she transformed television into therapy and entertainment into empathy. The show became more than ratings. It became ritual. Housewives paused their chores to watch. Office workers hid in break rooms. Strangers gathered in living rooms as if attending a sermon. When Oprah spoke, time seemed to slow down. Her words carried weight. her gaze carried compassion, and her presence carried permission to feel, to forgive, to hope again. But behind every glowing light and perfect cue, there was exhaustion. Every story she absorbed left a mark. Every tear she wiped left a shadow. She carried the pain of strangers home each night and sat with it in silence. The studio audience went home healed. Oprah often went home empty. Still, she showed up day after day because she knew the world needed this space. A place where people who'd been broken by life could come to remember their worth. And perhaps deep down, she needed it too. Because the Oprah Winfrey Show wasn't just a program. It was her way of turning her own survival into a sanctuary proof that even the most wounded hearts can become a home for others. And somewhere between the applause, the laughter and the tears, she created something that no one could copy: a ministry of humanity broadcast to the world. At the height of her power, Oprah Winfrey was untouchable. Her name alone could turn unknown authors into bestsellers. Her words could make presidents pause, and her face was as familiar to America as the sunrise. But behind that empire of smiles and applause, there was a woman quietly unraveling under the weight of her own compassion. For millions, she was strength itself, the healer, the listener, the one who made sense of pain. Yet few understood what it cost her to hold the world's sorrow. After each taping, when the lights dimmed and the audience filed out, she sat alone in her dressing room, mascara streaking down her cheeks, staring at her reflection as if asking it permission to cry. She gave everything: her energy, her empathy, her soul, until there was almost nothing left to give. Each episode was an emotional marathon, and by the end of every day, she felt emptied, drained, hollow. She had spent her whole life feeding others, first with words, then with comfort, and somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to feed herself. People called her the Queen of Talk. But queens, too, get tired of wearing crowns. The makeup, the lights, the expectations, they all began to blur. Every success came with a question: who am I? When the cameras stopped, she had created a kingdom of connection, but she couldn't always find her own reflection inside it. Oprah began to realize that fame is not freedom. It's a prison made of applause. When millions depend on your strength, you start believing you're not allowed to be weak. She couldn't rest because rest felt like betrayal, as if stopping even for a moment would mean disappointing the people who saw her as their light. So she kept going. She smiled wider, worked harder, listened deeper. But inside, there was a quiet fatigue, not just of the body, but of the spirit. She would later confess that there were nights she sat in her mansion surrounded by silence and felt utterly alone. The woman who had given voice to everyone else was losing her own. Still, she didn't stop. Because how do you stop when the world needs you? How do you rest when your purpose has become your burden? For Oprah, the show was both salvation and cage, the stage that healed others while slowly draining her. But she endured because endurance was all she'd ever known. Poverty had taught her to keep going. Trauma had taught her to keep going. Television now demanded the same. And so she did what she'd always done. She turned her exhaustion into empathy, her fatigue into faith, her loneliness into light. The Queen couldn't rest. But in her restlessness, she built something eternal, a legacy not of perfection, but of persistence. For most of her career, Oprah Winfrey's name was synonymous with triumph. Everything she touched seemed to rise, from talk shows to magazines to the people she believed in. But there was one dream she couldn't command into existence. It wasn't about money or ratings. It was about truth, a truth so painful that even Hollywood flinched. That dream was Beloved. Based on Toni Morrison's haunting novel, Beloved was the story of slavery's ghosts, Not the kind that float through the dark, but the kind that live inside a person long after freedom. To Oprah, it wasn't just a movie. It was a mission. It was her chance to confront the inherited trauma of her ancestors, to give voice to the unspoken pain that had shaped generations. She poured everything into it, her money, her credibility, her heart. She produced it, starred in it, and carried its message like a sacred fire. For years, she had healed others on her show, but Beloved was different. It wasn't about healing. It was about remembering, forcing a country to face what it preferred to forget. When the film was finally released in 1998, Oprah waited for the world to feel what she felt. The sorrow, the beauty, the reckoning. But the theaters stayed empty. Critics praised it. Audiences ignored it. People chose light-hearted comedies instead. The movie she believed could awaken a nation fell into silence. For Oprah, that silence was unbearable. She didn't just lose money, she lost a piece of her soul. For the first time in her career, the world did not echo her passion back to her. The woman who had built her life on connection felt the deepest isolation of all, being unseen in the one story that mattered most. She sat alone after the film's failure, staring at the headlines that reduced her years of devotion to box office numbers. They didn't see what she saw. The poetry in the pain, the dignity in the suffering, the courage it took to even tell that story. For Oprah, Beloved wasn't a flop. It was a confession, a way of saying, this is who we are, and this is what we survived. But sometimes the world isn't ready for the truth. In the years that followed, she rarely spoke about the film. Yet privately, she said it was one of the most profound experiences of her life. Because while it broke her heart, it also reminded her why she had started in the first place, not for applause, but for purpose. Failure, she realized, is only failure when you stop believing in the message. Beloved may not have filled theaters, but it filled her with something rarer: humility, endurance, and a deeper understanding of the cost of truth. It was the movie that broke her soul, but it also showed her that even broken souls can still light the way. For decades, Oprah Winfrey fought a war that no one could see, a battle between the woman the world adored and the woman she saw in the mirror. Her body had been a topic long before her soul ever was. Every magazine, every late-night joke, every cruel whisper turned her weight into a public debate, as if the inches of her waist measured the worth of her humanity. It began early when she was told she was too big for television, too dark for the camera, too emotional for news. But she kept showing up anyway, and the world made sure to remind her of it. Each pound she gained became a headline. Each pound she lost became another. There was no peace, not in triumph, not in transformation. She tried everything: diets, trainers, fasting, even the infamous wagon of fat. She rolled on stage in 1988 to symbolize her weight loss victory. The crowd cheered, but behind her smile there was exhaustion. Because no matter how much she lost, it was never enough, not for them, not for the image she had built, not for the silent critic inside her own mind. Years later, she would admit that food had been her first friend and her fiercest enemy. It was comfort during loneliness, reward during pain, escape during pressure. She didn't eat because she was greedy. She ate because she was hungry for peace. Then came the surgeries, the knee replacements that forced her to slow down, the quiet confessions about using medication to help control her weight. When she finally spoke openly about it, she said something few expected. "I'm not trying to be beautiful. I just want to be able to walk. I just want to breathe." It wasn't about vanity. It was about survival. Her body had carried a lifetime of burdens, from poverty to trauma to expectation, and now it was asking her for mercy. For Oprah, the war beneath her skin was never about fat or fame. It was about control. The same woman who had mastered television, built empires, and guided millions through their pain could not fully master her own reflection. And yet, maybe that was the point, that even the strongest among us are still human. In recent years, she began to speak differently about her body. Not with shame, but with gratitude. "This is the body that carried me through everything," she said. "It has survived abuse, rejection, judgment, and it's still standing." That was the truest victory. Not thinness, not headlines, but acceptance. She learned that the body is not an enemy to be conquered, but a home to be forgiven. And as she walked onto stages with her replaced knees standing taller than ever, she realized the battle wasn't about losing weight. It was about losing the need to prove her worth. Because the greatest transformation was never physical. It was the peace she found when she finally stopped fighting herself. There comes a moment in every dreamer's life when the world stops giving permission and you build without it. For Oprah Winfrey, that moment arrived when she realized she didn't just want to host a show, she wanted to own it. In the 1980s, television was still a man's world. Power sat in boardrooms filled with white executives who decided which faces appeared on screen and which stories were worth telling. Oprah had already broken barriers by becoming the first Black woman to lead a national talk show, but that wasn't enough. She didn't just want to appear in someone else's vision, she wanted to control her own. So she did something unthinkable for her time. She founded Harpo Productions, her own company named after her own name spelled backward. It was symbolic, a life rewritten, a destiny reversed. From Oprah, the girl told to obey, to Harpo, the woman who decided. At first, people laughed. They said no woman, and certainly no Black woman, could own and produce at that scale. But Oprah didn't wait for their approval. She hired her own team, built her own studio, and began producing The Oprah Winfrey Show under her own banner. It wasn't just a business move, it was a declaration: I am the master of my fate. Soon, Harpo became an empire. Books, films, radio magazines, digital platforms, all connected by the same core of empathy and excellence. She created spaces for voices that had long been ignored, turned literature into global movements through her book club, and elevated stories that others dismissed as too emotional or too ordinary. Each success shattered another ceiling. Each venture silenced another doubt. But behind the triumphs was something deeper: freedom. For the first time, Oprah wasn't being told what to say, who to interview, or how to feel. She didn't need permission to care, to cry, or to create. That independence became the model for generations of creators to come, especially women and people of color, who saw in her the proof that ownership wasn't a privilege. It was a right earned through courage and persistence. Years later, when asked what made her empire thrive, she said simply, "I built my business around the truth of who I am." And that truth, raw, fearless, unapologetic, became her most valuable currency. Because Harpo wasn't just a company. It was a rebellion written in success. A statement to every gatekeeper who ever said no. Oprah didn't ask to be let in. She built her own door and walked right through it. Success filled Oprah Winfrey's life with everything she once dreamed of. Mansions, fame, influence, admiration. But behind the golden glow of her empire stood a quieter, lonelier truth. For every seat she filled in her studios, there were empty chairs waiting at her own table. She had lost more than the world would ever know. Her half-brother Jeffrey died of AIDS in 1989, when the disease still carried shame and silence. Her half-sister Patricia lost herself to addiction and despair. Her mother Vernita left this world in 2018. Her father Vernon followed 4 years later. Each loss came without warning, leaving a space that could never be refilled. For someone who had spent her life helping others find closure, Oprah rarely got her own. There were no farewell conversations, no perfect goodbyes, only headlines and funerals and the haunting knowledge that some words will forever remain unsaid. The grief didn't come all at once. It came in waves during quiet dinners, during moments of joy, during long walks alone when she realized that the people who once knew her before fame were almost all gone. Each empty chair became a reminder. Even when you have everything, you can still feel the ache of what's missing. She spoke once about the silence that followed her father's death, how she sat in his favorite chair and felt both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for all he had given her, and guilt for the times she had been too busy to visit. Success, she learned, doesn't protect you from regret. It only amplifies what truly matters. Over time, she filled those chairs in another way, with friends who became family, with the laughter of students she had sponsored, with the voices of strangers she helped through her work. She discovered that love doesn't disappear when people die. It changes form. It lingers in memories, in lessons, in the echoes of their voices. The world saw Oprah surrounded by millions, but she knew that the measure of a life isn't in the number of people who cheer for you, it's in the few who truly stay. And even if their chairs are empty now, their presence still fills the room. In a world that dissected every breath Oprah Winfrey took, one part of her life remained wrapped in mystery, a love story that never needed a stage. While tabloids hunted for scandal and the public demanded spectacle, Oprah and Stedman Graham quietly built something rarer than fame, a love that didn't need to be performed to be real. They met in the mid-1980s when Oprah was still climbing. Still uncertain whether her voice, a Southern accent unfiltered emotional, would ever be accepted by mainstream America. Stedman was already successful in his own right. A businessman, an educator, an author. But unlike so many others, he wasn't threatened by her fire. He admired her not for her fame, but for her mind, her discipline, her hunger to change the world. At first, Oprah couldn't believe it. Here was a man who didn't want to compete with her, fix her, or shrink her to fit his comfort. Instead, he gave her space, not just physical space, but emotional breathing room. When she was exhausted from filming, when the world demanded too much of her, Stedman was there quietly, faithfully, without expectation. He didn't chase the cameras, didn't appear in interviews, didn't need credit. His love didn't arrive in grand gestures. It lived in small, steady acts of care. They never married a choice that baffled many. The world wanted a fairy tale wedding, a headline, a ring. But Oprah, with her unflinching honesty, once said, "If we had married, we wouldn't be together now." For her marriage meant compromise, the kind that required her to sacrifice the independence she had fought her entire life to earn. She didn't want to become someone's wife. She wanted to remain herself. And Stedman, in his quiet strength, understood that completely. He never demanded more than she could give. He never tried to define her success through his reflection. Instead, he became the calm in her storm. The man waiting in the background while the world watched her rise. When tabloids mocked her body, he stayed. When false rumors filled headlines, he stayed. When she doubted her own worth, he looked at her not as the world's Oprah, but as the woman he loved, human, imperfect, deserving of peace. To him, she didn't need to be the queen of talk. She just needed to be herself. And in that space of acceptance, Oprah found something she'd never known: love that didn't hurt, love that didn't demand, love that didn't fade when the spotlight dimmed. Their connection became a quiet rebellion, proof that not all great love stories need vows or witnesses. They built a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared solitude. She had her purpose, he had his. They met in the middle, not to complete each other, but to walk beside one another. Oprah Winfrey was never a mother in the traditional sense, but few women have nurtured more souls. When asked why she never had children, her answer was simple and brutally honest. "I didn't want to be a bad mother." It wasn't fear of responsibility, it was self-awareness. She knew the pain she carried from her own childhood, the scars left by neglect and abuse, and she refused to pass them on. Her life had been consumed by work, purpose, and people. There was no room for midnight feedings or school recitals. But instead of guilt, she found meaning in another form of motherhood and that transcended bloodlines. Through her Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa, she gave hundreds of young women what she never had: safety, education, belief. These girls call her Mom Oprah, not because she gave them life, but because she gave them hope. She visited their classrooms, read their essays, held their hands through heartbreak. Many of them, now doctors, lawyers, and leaders, say she changed their destiny. And in a way, she did not with lullabies, but with opportunity. Her philanthropy became her motherhood. Every scholarship she funded, every life she touched through education or charity, carried a piece of her. In those moments, she wasn't just a talk show host or a billionaire. She was a woman healing her inner child by helping others grow. The woman who once felt unloved became love itself. Yet there were nights when she admitted she wondered what it would have been like to hear a child call her mom, to have someone carry her name forward. But then she would remember the faces of her students, the countless people who told her she had saved their lives, and she would smile. She didn't give birth to one child. She raised a generation. In a world obsessed with definitions, Oprah redefined motherhood. It wasn't about biology, it was about legacy, about choosing to pour into others what life once denied her. And as her students graduate, each carrying her lessons into the world, she knows her lineage will never end. Because a mother's heart isn't measured by who she gives birth to, but by how much she gives of herself. Long before the cameras, the mansions, and the magazine covers, Oprah Winfrey walked barefoot through the red dirt of Mississippi, a brow who owned nothing but her voice. Decades later, she walks across her 40-acre estate in Montecito, California, surrounded by lavender fields, oak trees, and the quiet hum of peace. Yet even now, she says she can still feel that same earth beneath her feet. Because no matter how far she's come, she has never forgotten where she started. Wealth changed her surroundings, but not her spirit. She still rises before dawn to watch the sunrise, still prays in silence before beginning her day. Her home, though worth millions, is not a monument to luxury. It's a sanctuary of gratitude. Every room tells a story of endurance of a woman who built her life, one act of faith at a time. When guests visit, they often expect extravagance. Instead, they find simplicity: garden paths she tends herself, baskets of fresh vegetables she picks by hand, and books scattered across every table. "I want to live close to the ground," she once said. That's where the truth is. That truth follows her wherever she goes. When she walks across her land, she remembers her grandmother hanging clothes on a line, telling her that one day she might work for some good white folks. Oprah smiles when she recalls that memory, not in mockery, but in awe of how far that prophecy has turned. She doesn't work for anyone now. She builds for herself, and she gives to others. The soil beneath her feet has always been sacred. First the cracked clay of poverty, now the rich earth of abundance. But to Oprah, it's all the same ground. The same reminder that life moves in cycles. You rise, you fall, you plant, you grow. She walks her property barefoot, sometimes letting the cool grass touch her skin. To outsiders, it might seem symbolic. To her, it's survival. It's a way to stay human in a world that worships titles and trophies. Because when you've known hunger, the taste of enough will always feel divine. Oprah Winfrey never stopped touching the earth that once humbled her. She just learned how to grow gardens where pain once lived. Proof that even the poorest soil can yield a life of immeasurable beauty. When people speak of Oprah Winfrey's fortune, they talk about billions, the houses, the networks, the legacy. But those who truly understand her story know that her real wealth was never measured in dollars. It was measured in impact, in the lives she lifted, in the dreams she financed, in the broken hearts she helped rebuild. Compassion, not money, became her currency. From the earliest days of her success, she gave quietly long before it became fashionable to publicize generosity. She built schools, funded scholarships, paid debts, and bought homes for people she barely knew. When disasters struck from Hurricane Katrina to the Maui wildfires, her first instinct was not to ask, "How much?" but "How soon can we help?" In South Africa, the girls from her leadership academy grew up calling her Mama O. In America, students she never met received her scholarships. And across the globe, millions of viewers found courage in her words, proof that love, when multiplied, can outlast fame. Yet for Oprah, compassion was never charity. It was empathy in motion, a continuation of the girl who once had nothing, but refused to let others feel the same hunger. She knew the weight of despair, the humiliation of asking for help, the loneliness of being unseen. So when she gave, she didn't do it to be celebrated. She did it because she remembered. Her generosity became the form of justice. She once said, "To whom much is given, much is required." But her giving went beyond obligation. It was an act of gratitude. Each dollar she gave was a thank you note to the universe for letting her survive. There were times she faced criticism for being too emotional, too generous, too trusting, but she never apologized for it. "If you're blessed," she said, "you should be a blessing." Today, her impact is written not in numbers, but in names, thousands of young women who became leaders because she believed in them, countless families who rebuilt after tragedy, because she reached out, and millions of strangers who learned that compassion is the highest form of power. The girl who once ate words to stay alive grew up to feed the world with hope. And in that giving, she found the only wealth that truly endures, the wealth of a life lived in service of others. 71 years old. The knees ache, the back stiffens, the mirror tells a story written in lines of time and triumph, and yet the light in Oprah Winfrey's eyes has never dimmed. She is no longer chasing the world. The world now comes to her. And still every morning she rises before dawn, opens the window, and whispers a simple prayer. Thank you for another chance to serve. The woman who once read Bible verses in a dirt floor cabin now speaks to millions from a place of peace. She has nothing left to prove and everything left to give. Fame no longer excites her. Legacy does. She knows that the greatest stage is not television, but the human heart. Her show ended years ago, but her message never did. It lives on in podcasts, in classrooms, in every person who carries a bit of her courage into the world. Behind the wealth and recognition lies a deeper truth. Oprah has become what she always needed, a source of light in dark places. Yet even now, she admits she's still learning to heal. The pain of her childhood, the weight of expectation, the loneliness of leadership, none of it disappeared with success. She says, "I'm still becoming." And maybe that's the point, even icons are unfinished. Some nights she sits on her porch in Montecito, wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon fade to orange. She thinks about the little girl who once had nothing. No shoes, no food, no safety, and she smiles. That girl didn't vanish. She grew up and built a world where no one would have to feel as small as she once did. Her body may move slower now, but her fire has only deepened. It's no longer the wild flame of ambition. It's the steady warmth of wisdom. Every step she takes, every word she shares is a reminder that light does not retire, it only changes shape. And so Oprah keeps walking. One foot in gratitude, one in grace, still giving, still teaching, still shining. Because some souls are born not just to survive, but to illuminate. Her journey has come full circle from hunger to healing, from silence to strength, from pain to purpose. And even now, as the years pile gently upon her shoulders, the fire within her refuses to go out. Because Oprah Winfrey was never just a talk show host. She was and remains a testament to what happens when a human being refuses to let darkness win. She still stands not as a symbol of perfection, but as proof that compassion can outlast suffering, and that one woman's light can change the course of millions. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to USA Legends Never Fade, the place where timeless stories live on. Legend begins as a spark. Keep yours burning.